So let's talk about Moses Itauma. Let's give the boxing philosophy perspective, and we're going to explore 11 ideas. The first idea is that he's one win from becoming the second youngest heavyweight champion ever, just behind Mike Tyson, but ahead of Muhammad Ali. This shows to me the speed of Moses Itauma's rise. Some boxing critics, some have been critical. They've been critical of the development. But does this reflect the culture of the criticism as opposed to the criticism being valid? Because Moses Itauma has had pace with his movement, and being mentioned among Ali and Tyson is absolutely complimentary. We, and when I say we, who is we? I think it's the British media, the British circle, and many British fighters believe Moses Itauma is special. But the bigger question may be, how special is he? Ultimately, history will not remember whether Itauma moved too quickly. It will remember whether he was good enough to justify the speed. Now, the next idea is that Moses Itauma, flat out refused to fight AJ and Tyson Fury. And his reason is respect, not fear. According to him, AJ isn't in his prime, and neither is Tyson Fury. Now, fighting and beating AJ or Tyson Fury would be like a passing of the torch. Think of when Lennox Lewis fought Frank Bruno, I believe it was in Cardiff. And when he beat Frank Bruno, that was like a passing of the torch in the heavyweight British context. But why? Why is Moses disinterested in the fight? Is there personal relationships? Is there business relationships? Is there some other variable here? A Tyson Fury fight would likely be a very difficult matchup, or it could be a difficult matchup. And a matchup against AJ brings different dangers. And here's the thing, economically and culturally, the fight makes sense. Economically, the fight makes a lot of money. There'll be lots of investment. And culturally, it will have a significant cultural impact worldwide, and particularly within the heavyweight British context. I guess sometimes the passing of the torch is necessary for boxing to move forward, but Moses Itauma appears unwilling to build his future by destroying someone else's past. And then the next idea is that he says it would be disrespectful to call out two men he admits are no longer what they were. And again, we're talking about AJ and Tyson Fury. If we were in a prime, it would be great fights. And I think the recent evidence suggests Tyson Fury and AJ are indeed past their primes. I think many of us would agree that from 1 to 10, 10 being in their prime, 1 being past their prime, they're nowhere near the prime angle. But that does not mean that they would provide a test, and that does not mean that they could not win. But perhaps a torch can be passed without a brutal loss. Bruno, when he fought Lennox Lewis, had a tremendous performance, an absolutely great performance. He landed some great right hands and some great double jabs. But the ending of that fight, the ending in round 7 was brutal, absolutely brutal. Lewis was vicious with the finish. Boxing, in a sense, represents reality. The risk to be great, but a greater risk to be battered. No one, I think, or many people would not want to see the battering of an aged AJ or the battering of an aged Tyson Fury. We would want to see a courageous loss, perhaps, but not a sad ending. Boxing is brutal. Life is brutal. And it's a simple lesson. And in a sense, greatness requires risk. But boxing reminds us that there is a difference between witnessing the end of an era and watching a man become a victim of it. So the next idea is that people see Moses Itauma's rise as being fast, and he's blinded to that side. You have Dempsey McKean, Dillian White, Jermaine Franklin, and now Hrgovic, a steady ladder. Only outsiders can read it as a sprint. And what I say to this is that boxers are built not only in the ring, but also in the environment. Think of it, you know, the sparring wars, the teaching, the amateur pedigree, 1,000 hours on the mitts. This all contributes to the growth, and Moses Itauma will be no exception to this. Moses Itauma, in a sense, is a product of preparation. People create a narrative bias on other people's lives, but perhaps they don't hold themselves accountable to the same standard. Figuratively speaking, the ladder of Moses Itauma was being processed or being built years ago. Of course, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, not all ladders are the same. The ladder of Hrgovic is very different to the ladder of Moses Itauma. And what looks like rapid success from outside can actually be the visible result of thousands of invisible hours. The public see the climb, but rarely sees who built the ladder. And the next idea is that, you know, Moses Itauma has been boxing for 11 to 12 years and doesn't think he's rushed anything at all. He states, I just get in the ring and fight. I'll come out. Is the discipline that built him the same thing that keeps him from feeling that pressure? Here's an important point. Discipline is a key element of boxing. A prime Mike Tyson had discipline. Allegedly, when Evander Holyfield saw Mike Tyson trained, he said he saw no one work out like Mike Tyson. Moses Itauma, from an outsider looking in, looks like a disciplined athlete. But it's important. It's important to realize that you have to stay disciplined. Discipline is a daily exercise. A camp where you show lack of discipline makes you an unprepared boxer. The point is you have to keep the disciplined ball moving, figuratively speaking. You have to keep being disciplined. So if Moses comes into the Hrgovic fight unprepared, then Hrgovic will be fighting at that moment an undisciplined fighter. But at this point of time, Moses Itauma brings discipline to the table. On the other side of the table, I wonder if Hrgovic has always been disciplined and what he will bring to the table in this fight. And in a sense, talent can open the door to greatness. It can open the door to greatness, but discipline is what keeps that door open. And the moment discipline disappears, vulnerability enters the room. And the next idea is that he sees Hrgovic not as a threat, but as a shelf to put his own trophies on. He states, I get to add their accolades onto my career. Hrgovic has the best resume so far. It's the best resume that Moses Itauma has had to contend with. Boxing fans, of course, are very critical of boxing records. Remember, boxers are shaped in their amateur and professional chapters, and there's many different chapters to shaping a boxing. Many fans, they can minimize boxers. I hear the term cab drivers a lot. And it's funny because even if you're a cab driver, that doesn't really say anything about your boxing skills. So that's logically incoherent, but let's move on. But like I said, many fans can minimize an opponent's pedigree. Unfortunately, this shows a level of ignorance from the consumer, a narrative bias that gives us no context. And let me clarify, I don't mean all boxing fans, I mean a certain amount of boxing fans. Hrgovic objectively has a resume. He has fought top 10 fighters. There's no doubt about that. And his jab and his straight right, they are dangerous weapons. He also has an underestimated left hook to the body that's dangerous, and he brings tempos to fights. So all the evidence, when you stack up all the evidence, when you put all the evidence on the table, it suggests that he will come to win. And if Moses Itauma wins, it will be a significant achievement. Because in a sense, you cannot simultaneously dismiss Hrgovic and then celebrate Itauma for beating him. The value of the victory depends on respecting the quality of the opponent. And Hrgovic is a quality opponent. And then the next idea here is that Moses Itauma states he will pat himself on the back if he wins, and that admission is probably one of the most human things that he said. And what does this say about Moses Itauma's perspective? And more importantly, what does it say about Moses Itauma's perspective towards Hrgovic? To me, the connotation here is that he respects Hrgovic. he understands that Hrgovic has credibility within that ring. And perhaps greatness requires dissatisfaction, but there must eventually come a moment when ambition allows a fighter to recognize how far he has already traveled. Remember, if Itauma wins, not only does he beat Hrgovic, but he will also pick up a title. And that, I'm assuming, will be an emotional moment. And then the next idea here is that his toughest amateur fight left him concussed. And this was against, I believe, Alois Jr., a man now in the same stable. According to Itauma, I just went in there to try and stop him and left the ring with a concussion. What did that first experience, teach Itauma? Now, I have not seen that first amateur fight, but what Itauma is explaining there is an incidence of resistance. Let's first consider what a brain concussion is. So a concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury caused by a blow to the head or body that makes the brain move rapidly inside the skull. So the context here is that, of course, there are different types of concussion, but to experience a concussion, to experience that resistance, it shows some character to endure that type of pain. This was an adversity play. And what's important here is, how did he react? And would he react differently if the situation was to occur again? Can Hrgovic put him in some uncomfortable positions? Can Hrgovic put Itauma in an uncomfortable position? And how does Itauma react to that uncomfortable position? Imagine if Hrgovic has a great start. How does Itauma process that, and how does he react to that? His preparation should give him the tools to deal with these scenarios. But surely it's different using the tools in the gym than using those same tools under the bright lights. And all in all, preparation can simulate adversity, but eventually every great fighter has to discover whether the lessons learned in the gym survive when reality starts pushing back. And then the next idea, he's never bothered doing a full 12-round spar. And he's proud of it. Itauma is proud of it. According to him, according to Itauma, there's no need to be in the ring for longer than you need to be. Here's a question. Is a fighter who's never been 12 rounds a risk, or simply a man who ends fights early? There is a risk here. Objectively, there is a risk here. There is a possibility that Hrgovic could extend Itauma into the second half of the fight. There's a strong possibility. Now, I don't want to be strawmanned in the comments. I'm not saying it will go to the second half of the fight. I'm saying it could. There's a difference. But what happens if this fight goes into round 7? What happens if it goes into round 8? What happens if it goes into round 9, into round 10, etc.? If you're not preparing for 12 rounds and it goes 12 rounds, does that make you unprepared? If the fight goes long and the reflexes get slower, the speed of foot gets slower, the punches become less hurtful, this could get very, very interesting. But let's be honest. Hrgovic needs to be better defensively to enable this. And Hrgovic has a problem. He has a cut problem. And I wonder, will that southpaw jab from Itauma bust up his face? I think Hrgovic needs to make some defensive adjustments in this fight, and I think that will be essential. I wonder, will Itauma aim his southpaw jab to get Hrgovic's cut? When I envision it, I think, from the southpaw position, is he going to feint? Then maybe jab to the chest, maybe then feint, and then do a right jab to the left eyebrow. And that, that could cause Hrgovic some serious problems, because if Itauma is able to cut Filip Hrgovic, particularly early in the fight, that could be a significant factor. And perhaps the unanswered question is not whether Itauma can dominate the early rounds, it is who he becomes when dominance disappears and fatigue begins negotiating with technique. And the premise here is that the fight will go into the second half, and we don't know. I mean, Filip Hrgovic has a very good chin. So you think, okay, if you was to go 1 to 10 on chin and you put Hrgovic as an 8, maybe you put him as a 9, But many people look at Hrgovic's defense and they might give that like a 5 or a 6 or maybe a 4. So there's a real question here in terms of will the fight extend into the second half of the fight? And then the next idea is the coldest line of the interview, which is from Moses Itauma when he says, whether I knock him out in the first or the last, I'm still going to get paid the same. This, of course, is objectively true, and the great Lennox Lewis would say, I don't get paid for overtime. That was one of his lyrics. But there may be a better question here, and that may be, does he have elite conditioning to operate in an optimal manner for 12 rounds? Does he know how to pace himself and accelerate his output effectively? There is one thing doing it in the gym, but surely it's different doing it under the bright lights. George Foreman, when he fought Muhammad Ali in the Thriller of Manila, a fantastic event, punched himself out over 8 rounds, and therefore Muhammad Ali was able to knock him out. Hrgovic's experience could be a benefit to him here, because he should understand pacing himself over the 12 rounds. He understands when he can drop the tempo, when he can raise the tempo, and he should be able to pace himself effectively. And of course, when we're talking about pacing ourselves and being strong at the beginning, middle, and end of the fight, this is all part, I think, of developing your ring IQ, and it's all part of that ring adaptability. And here's an interesting thing here. Moses Itauma doesn't know objectively if he can do 12 rounds under the bright lights. He might be able to do it in the gym, but can he do it under the bright lights? So the further this fight goes, the more questions will be asked. And you wonder, within the Moses psychology, within the Moses Itauma psychology, is he questioning that? And, knocking somebody out early demonstrates power, but knowing exactly when to spend that power demonstrates intelligence. And championship boxing eventually demands both. Now, the next idea is that he's been asking the real question since he was a kid. Will you remember me if I don't become a world champion? And is the boy who never wanted to be forgotten the real reason the man refuses to slow down? Maybe that's the motivation. Maybe that's part of the purpose. Maybe that's what fuels the engine. Maybe that's what makes him such a disciplined athlete. But in a sense, in a philosophical sense, perhaps Moses Itauma is not really chasing a belt at all. Perhaps the belt is simply the physical proof that his name will survive long after his career does. So here are 7 questions with regards to Moses Itauma. Question number 1. Is Moses Itauma being rushed, or are critics simply uncomfortable with how quickly exceptional talent can develop? I'm not sure if he's being rushed. I'm not sure if that premise is true. I think some boxing critics have been overly critical with stating that he hasn't updated. How can I put this? They're stating that he hasn't updated the challenges enough, or the competition hasn't been strong enough. And I think that's objectively not true. He's fought Jermaine Franklin, he's fought Dillian Whyte, and he's fought McKean. And these people have respectable careers. These people, Dillian Whyte was in the top 5 at one point. Jermaine Franklin had some very respectable performances against AJ and Dillian Whyte. He took them both 12 rounds, and he showed to be durable and had good ring intelligence. And McKean had a very good performance against Filip Hrgovic. So I think there's a camp that says he's been moving too slow. And I think I don't think there's any rationale behind that at all, because clearly he hasn't been moving too slow. He's been moving relatively quite fast. Then there's a camp that will say he's moving at the right speed, but then there's another camp that might say, oh, he's moving too fast. In determining that question or answering that question, it depends how the machine has been developed to handle the second half of the fight. If for any reason he goes in against Filip Hrgovic and falls apart in the second half of the fight, then the answer to that question maybe would be yes. But there's no evidence to suggest that. And you would hope that Ben Davidson, being a highly respected trainer with a wealth of experience would be able to, he would be able to tell if his fighter has an engine or not, and they would be able to make the appropriate adjustments to ensure that, let's say if his engine from 1 to 10 was like a 5, that they're moving it along to 6, 7, 8 before he's getting into situations where he can go into some sincerely dark places. So I guess if you're out of camp, moving too slow, moving at the right time, or moving too fast, I think it's maybe at the right time. Maybe, if anything, it's a bit too quick, but I wouldn't say he's moving too slow. That's definitely not the case. Question number 2, does refusing AJ and Tyson Fury show respect, or is Itauma turning down the perfect opportunity for a passing of the torch moment? Itauma fighting AJ would be a massive event. It would have huge cultural relevance. There would be huge money. It would enter the boxing algorithm. Everyone would want to tune in to see that fight. The risk of that fight would be that if Itauma battered AJ, I don't think we would want to see that. We wouldn't want to see AJ retiring on his stall. However, there are other scenarios. AJ could pull off the upset, assuming he's the underdog, or he could put up a gallant performance like Frank Bruno did against Lennox Lewis and then lose. I think a courageous loss, that can be a good passing of the torch, like when Vladimir Klitschko passed on the torch when he lost to Anthony Joshua. But we don't want to see our legends battered and beaten. And I think that's the same with Tyson Fury. There's a difference between being beaten and being battered into submission, and we don't want to see that. The third question, if Hrgovic survives the early rounds, what happens when Itauma is forced into territory he has never experienced professionally? Well, this is going to be interesting, and it's depending on a few factors. Will Hrgovic be damaged in those early rounds? Would he have experienced some cuts? And would he be competitive in those early rounds? If the fight is competitive in those early rounds, then the middle rounds become more interesting. If Hrgovic is simply surviving, then that still gives Moses Itauma the advantage. But we're assuming that Filip Hrgovic, will he survive? From Filip Hrgovic's perspective, he might be thinking, well, will he survive my onslaught? Filip Hrgovic is a fast starter. He's a confident fighter. He asserts his authority straight away. So this could be a real battle of nutrition at the beginning. This potentially could be a firefight, but it depends on the tactics that both fighters employ. But if we go into the second half of the fight and Moses Itauma isn't dominating, then Filip Hrgovic could really start to, use his experience and use his ring IQ to try and get some leverage. But we'll see. It'll be funny because we'll see a different Itauma, and Itauma will discover there's the potential that if it goes into the second half of the fight and under the right conditions, that Itauma will start to find out things about himself that he might not have known. So it's very fascinating, very interesting. The fourth question is, can Itauma's discipline and preparation compensate for his lack of experience in long, difficult fights? It depends. If that preparation creates elite conditioning, then potentially yes. But if he has a conditioning issue and a lack of experience, then this could become exceptionally problematic. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that he has any stamina issues. And if anything, Moses Itauma is a fast fighter. He has fast feet and very fast hands and is exceptionally accurate. There's no evidence to suggest that he would slow down. His weight might be interesting. Will he come in heavy? Will he come in at his regular weight, or will he come in lighter? That might be an indication of how he will approach the fight. But in any case, a long fight means that there will be a test, because if you're going into the second half of the fight with Filip Hrgovic, then he's going to hit you, and you're going to feel his power, and you're going to feel his aura. And like I said, he's a very confident boxer. He's not all that. If you put all the evidence on the table, there's no evidence that he just lays down. He comes to fight. He's going to come to win, and he will believe that he will win. Question number 5, are boxing fans too quick to dismiss Hrgovic's resume simply because Itauma makes defeating good fighters look easy. I think there's different boxing camps. You got the camp that says that Moses Itauma destroys Hrgovic. He may well destroy Hrgovic, but it's not that conclusion that's the problem. It's the way they dismiss Hrgovic's resume. So you got that camp. Then you got like a smaller Filip Hrgovic camp that says he's going to destroy Moses Itauma. And potentially that can happen. But again, they might minimize Moses Itauma. So you've got these two camps and they're minimizing each other's strengths. And then you got another camp which would, you know, highlight that Filip Hrgovic is strong competition, but they just feel that Moses Itauma is elite. So it's like saying, okay, I think Filip Hrgovic is good and he's going to provide a good test, but Moses Itauma is elite, and therefore I think he's going to win 7 to 8 rounds. And I think that's more respectable. I don't like it when people dismiss people's credentials. To me, I just think it's ignorant. Question 6. If Hrgovic starts well and puts Itauma under genuine pressure, will we finally discover how Itauma responds to adversity? Of course. And it depends. There's a difference between winning a round, getting hit with a good shot, and then getting dropped for the first time in your career. Of course, what would be interesting is if Filip Hrgovic, in his last fights, I've noticed that every now and then he invests to the body. It'll be interesting to see if Filip Hrgovic can get any body shots off and how Moses Itauma will react to that. The jab battle is going to be particularly interesting. Can he win the jab battle? If Filip Hrgovic can win the jab battle, this becomes a very interesting fight. And or if he can time his straight right through the jab, so when Moses Itauma is throwing the jab, if he can time his right hand and his backhand to take away Moses Itauma's jab and then get momentum with his backhand, then again, this becomes a very interesting fight. And that will be a unique puzzle for Moses Itauma to solve, because he hasn't been put in that situation before. He hasn't been hit on a consistent basis. He hasn't fought someone who has been able to implement a jab or hit him with like 10, 20 jabs. He hasn't fought someone who can hit him consistently with the straight right. He hasn't fought someone that can hit him consistently with body shots or make him uncomfortable or put him in uncomfortable positions. So yes, this would be interesting, but there's different levels to adversity. If it's like 1 to 100, you know, you could have a 50, you could have a 55, and then if you get knocked down, maybe that's like a 90. So there's different levels of adversity. But I would expect that if we look at the evidence, we're going to get a Hrgovic that's going to bring some form of adversity. And I guess the only caveat to that is if Moses Itauma scores an early knockout. And then the final question is Itauma chasing a world title because he wants to be champion, or because deep down he is afraid of being forgotten? It's very hard to understand someone else's psychology. Well, it's hard to understand our own psychology, let alone someone else's. Perhaps that might be true. Maybe it's not true. I'm pretty sure, being in boxing, that winning a world title is important. And I'm pretty sure that if you want to make a name as a boxer, that you don't want to be forgotten. There is the marketing machine of Itauma is gaining traction. The car of Moses Itauma is moving forward very quickly, and he's being spoken about. He is part of the boxing algorithm. He's part of the British boxing algorithm. He's part of the British heavyweight boxing algorithm, and he's part of the boxing algorithm in general. And for some people, that's a nice feeling, that respect, that admiration. And if you think that losing will make you forgotten, and if you're scared of being forgotten, or if that's something that affects you, then that to me is motivation to train hard and be the best version of yourself. And ultimately, Moses Itauma wants to come into every fight being the best version of himself, and this fight is no exception. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. And that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.